Hello, everyone. I want to start by saying, remarking what an honor it is for me to be on stage with two such powerful and eloquent and original, excuse me, and outraged writers of fiction, frequently very funny ones as well. And not just writers of fiction. I mean, both men are distinguished novelists, but I'm not sure that it matters in our world if our great novelists are also write essays and criticism and other things very well, but these two men certainly do. And it matters to me. Almost every word you read from these two gentlemen in any form is worth attending to. And I think that matters. And anyway, it's a treat. I'll introduce them one at a time. Mohammed Hanif, next to me, is the author of several novels, most notably A Case of Exploding Mangoes, which won the Commonwealth Prize and was nominated for many, many other prizes. He was born in Okara. He graduated from the Pakistani Air Force Academy and went into journalism. In London, he became head of the BBC's Urdu service. In addition to writing fiction and plays, he contributes a regular opinion column to the New York Times. And he was profiled in the New Yorker last year by Dexter Filkins, who called him, quote, perhaps the foremost observer of Pakistan's contradictions and absurdities. In a lovely profile, it's worth finding. Nadeem Aslam is the author of many highly regarded works of fiction, including Maps for Lost Lovers, which was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and The Wasted Vigil. He was born in Pakistan, but he grew up largely in the UK after his father, a communist, fled President Zia's regime. His latest novel, The Golden Legend, was published last month by Alfred A. Knopf. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to start. This panel is about, in some small part, conspiracies and satire. And it's hard to use those words right now in our world without thinking about the 45th president of the United States. And I'm wondering if you can both start by telling me where you were on the morning of the past election in the United States, where you were, and what you thought about the world and about what you were working on at the time. Nadeem, would you like to start?
I actually stay away from the media, so I come from England, so we'd had Brexit a few months earlier. And so I had an intimation that this might be, the Trump election might be part of this wave of negativity, let's call it that seems to be sweeping across the planet. So I had a sense that it would happen.
Were you in the middle of a piece of writing at the time, or do you, and did it change your thoughts about what you were working on at the time?
No, in a way, I've said this before. To me, when you come from the margins, and I'm a non-white person in a world, in a land where most of the decisions are made by white people. I'm a working class man in a society where most of the decisions are not made by the working classes. If you come from the margins, the post-Trump world is the pre-Trump world. I know people who work behind counters in shops, and this is not anecdotal. I know someone who works in a bank, and they say that a customer comes, and if you can't help them in any way, they want to return an item, and somehow the warranty is not there, or they want a loan and the bank can't offer them a loan. They say that they are just counting the seconds before the racial insults come out. And that has always been the case, that you, Paki, do this for me. So I always say that, the gloves are not coming off, the mask is coming off now. That,
You raised some issues I would like to return to, but I'm going to ask Mohammed if you would pick up that question as well.
Yeah, no, I was in Karachi, and and somehow people are still kind of, although there's a lot to sort of worry about what's happening in Pakistan, somehow we still find time to discuss world politics. People are just obsessed with politics. And I am a working hack, so I remember it because, sometimes some white man sitting in New York calls you up that the results are coming in. Will you stay up and do a quick reaction piece? So I was up and I had to do a reaction piece. And my first reaction was that we make a living basically, Nadeem is a very serious and profound writer. We basically make a living telling jokes. And my first reaction was, we're going to be out of job very soon because Trump has come and you cannot satirize anything like that. I was worried about my cartoonist friends as well. I was like, what are they going to do now? What's going to happen to them? And by the time I'd finished my piece and sent it off and basically said that, okay, we've lived this life for a very long time, welcome to your own chosen dictator type person that, who have a weird dress sense. All dictators do. They have styling issues. And then the next day I woke up late, and I've stopped using it now, but I was used to be on WhatsApp then. And do you know where Trump was really born?
The Bronx, I thought.
Waziristan in Pakistan. There was a photo. There was this childhood photo being circulated all around Pakistan. Yeah.
I think you're a birther.
You can't. So you saw it on WhatsApp. There has to be some truth. Yeah.
You described yourself. I would not qualify you as a hack in any regard, but I do want to mention, since you brought up your opinion writing, you had a column you wrote for the New York Times this week that was censored in Pakistan. Can you tell us what happened?
I don't know. I only saw it on Twitter. I was on the plane. I was on the plane. So International New York Times gets published in Pakistan, I think in many other countries as well. And I think they probably pay them something to publish it. So there was so I saw somebody posted a picture of this page, the op-ed page, where it says opinion, and then half the page is blank, which I think is fabulous. I mean, blank page is a wonderful thing, as every writer knows. It's full of possibilities. You can just anything. In fact, one of my friends wrote, he said, this is the most serene piece of writing. So which is fine.
What was it about?
It was about it's the same stuff that you write every month or every week about Taliban, about terrorism, and about good militants and bad militants, and nothing that doesn't get written every day. But somebody wakes up someday and say, no, this is a blank page would look better, and I completely agree.
Nadeem, I want to go back to something you mentioned during your first response. You talked a bit about social class, about knowing people from all aspects of society, all areas, which certainly has to be important for any fiction writer. I wonder if you can speak to the question of social class in terms of your readership. Anyone who reads novels in the world is clearly a member of the elite to some regard, right? In writing, especially in Pakistan, for the audience there, it's quite elite. And of course, it is almost everywhere, people who read fiction. Do you sometimes feel that, I don't want to say preaching to the converted, but do you feel that you can reach the people you want to reach with your writing?
It's a very good question, but I think you will be asking me to apologize for my biography. That is what happened to me. I became a writer, and that seems to be the only thing I can do.
I don't want an apology. I'm just wondering how a fiction writer can read it. Go ahead.
I don't know. In that, I can't answer that because I don't know how my books are received or who reads them. But to talk about conspiracy theories, I was in Afghanistan some years ago, and a young man told me that, did I know that a few minutes after Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, he heard a distant noise, and nobody else heard it. His companions didn't hear it. He came down to Earth and he asked them whether anybody else had heard it, and nobody had. And because he was a celebrity, he went around the globe. And in a Muslim country, he was walking down the street and he heard that sound again. And he said, "What is that sound?" And they said, "This is the Muslim call to prayer. This is the azan." and he said that, "Well, I heard it on the moon." and he converted to Islam. And he became a Muslim. And I told this young man, that I had heard that story before, and that it wasn't true. I'd heard it in Yorkshire, where I'm from, in England. I had heard it in Pakistan. I'd heard it in India. It's not true. And then he went into another loop of conspiracy that, well, they don't want someone important to be a Muslim. That's why this truth is being hidden. So this is, as I said, this is all understood, but as a novelist, and coming from and this is how I'm going to bring in what you were saying, coming from the class and where my sympathies lie. It's always to break down the crowd into one heartbeat, into one consciousness, into one mind, which is to look for the individual. Elias Canati, in his book Crowd and Power, says that, it's always the enemy's fault. He was planning it. If he wasn't planning it, he was thinking it. If he wasn't thinking it, he would have thought of it. So, as I said, having said all this, and having heard this one particular conspiracy theory on 5 different continents, my impulse is always to go to the 1%. What is it that appeals to why does a conspiracy theory appeal to a person? What happens to you? There's a poem by Virginia Hamilton Adair, which has haunted me for 20 years, ever since I read it. It's the day the Second World War ends, a child asks the mother, "So the war is over?" And she says, "Yes." And he says, "Who won?" and she says, "We did, because we have the bomb." And she's ironing some clothes, and she says to the child, "Would you please go up to the attic and get me some clothes hangers?" And the boy hesitates and becomes anxious and says, "Do I have to go?" And she says, "No, but you like to be helpful, don't you? So if you will." So the child goes, and years later he confides in his mother that when you said, "We have the bomb," I thought you meant the family. We did. And that it was kept in the attic. and Virginia Hamilton Adair writes that, pity the 3-year-old climbing the stairs with silent courage into the terror of catastrophe.
Yep.
So this is what I, as a novelist, as someone who is on the margins of almost everything, this is where I go. And then beyond that, I think we can talk about conspiracy theories and the various kinds of conspiracy theories there are.
Yep. Mohammed, Thomas Pynchon said somewhere that paranoia is the garlic in the kitchen of life, and that we need plenty of it. and I am wondering whether you think conspiracy theories somehow are necessary to we humans. Like, do we need them? Are they healthy sometimes? Are they ever good things?
But they're fun, to begin with. You exercise your imagination, and especially if you live in a society, and I'm talking about your society as well as my society, where information is controlled and denied and spun and has a value. So there are like, sort of these huge gaps. What happened? Who did it? Why did they do it? So I think people use their, imagination, and they kind of, they come up with these fabulous stories. I mean, writers to a certain extent, whatever they, novelists especially, I think they work like people are storytellers. So you don't have to be like a sort of a novelist to sit down and come up with a plot. I mean, people are coming up with plots all the time, and then you create something, and then you kind of start believing it. So Nadeem has told you the whole story about Neil Armstrong, but he hasn't told you what his Muslim name was. So see, so why is he not sharing that information with us? So I think, yeah, these are kind of serious things that people, we kind of stay up late worrying about these things.
Well, A Case of Exploding Mangoes is one of the great, it's a paranoid masterpiece. And are you more paranoid than most people? Do you have a gift for this as well?
No, I think I'm pretty relaxed person. I'm kind of okay with letting things be. But yeah, sometimes when you have to write, for example, when I was trying to write this novel, there were already too many conspiracy theories about this. It's about a plane crash, that how did this plane come down? And I studied a bit of avionics in my sort of young days, and the most probable thing would be that something went wrong with the plane. Planes are always tumbling out of the skies. Like, that's the thing that they do. Like, maybe there was a short circuit, maybe sort of a wire connecting something to broke. But now try writing a novel about that. It doesn't go beyond page 5. So you have to come up with something, sort of more substantial. So you've heard things that people have said. So you try and kind of improve upon that, add to those things, and see how far you can push your luck. And as we all know now, that you can push it pretty far. You can say the most outrageous things, and people would believe it. And you can say the most obvious thing, and people would say, "No, how did you get to that conclusion?" And then the frightening thing is that you say the most outrageous thing that you can come up with, and then when people read it, they believe that it's all true. And some of them kind of very serious senior people. I remember after my book came out, when a retired serious general, former head of one of the intelligence agencies, he met me at one of these tours, kind of put his arm around my shoulder. He said, "Son, you've written a great book. I loved it. Now tell me who told you all this." I'm like, dude, now that's a scary, you can laugh, but that's a scary thought. Like, dude, you're responsible for our bomb in the attic. But you believe like the rubbish that I write. So it's not.
But both of you write fiction that strikes me as being for our current moment in the world, yet also has its eyes on, on the ages. And I think your fiction will be read for a very long time. And Nadeem, I know, for example, you've worked on some of your novels for a very long time, haven't you? Didn't your second novel, your third novel, take you more than 10 years to write?
Yes, but that's again connected to my biography, which is that I went to England at the age of 14 with very little English, and very quickly I had to enter the education system, and the subjects I did well in were sciences, because for sciences your English needn't be good. You just need to get the facts right. But the things that I was interested in, history, literature, etc., which I would have studied in Urdu had I stayed there. I don't come from an affluent background in Pakistan, so I didn't go to what are known as an English medium school. So I went to university to read sciences. And in my third year, when I was 22, I think, 21, I realized that my English was good enough now to do what I really wanted to do, which was to write. So I dropped out and I didn't tell my parents. And I began working on my novel, which I wrote in 11 months. Then I didn't know how to get a publisher, so I picked up a copy of one of Naipaul's novels, and who was a writer I admired, and looked at the copyright page, got the address, and sent them the manuscript. And 10 days later, I got a phone call saying, "We have your manuscript, come and have lunch." I was in Yorkshire, and I said, "I can't." And they said, "Why not?" I said, "I have no money." And they said, "Can you borrow some?" And so I did. They said, "We'll give you money, just come." So after the book was accepted, then I said that now I'm going to do my O-levels, my A-levels, my degree, my MA in the subjects that I wished I had done had I known English. Now I know English. So I sat down and I would ask a person, "Tell me a great writer," and they would say Dickens. So I went and read all 14 and a half of Dickens's novels. And I would name a writer, and they would say D.S. Lawrence. I would go and read sequentially everything. So while I was working on my second novel, I was educating myself. So they were my thesis years,
We're getting off topic a little bit, but I hope you don't mind. But because one thing when I think about your work and when I think about everything I've read about you is it seems to me you have a very stronger than usual sense of vocation. I've read you say that you sacrificed friendships and relationships, and you've spent years working on your fiction, and that you've gone to great lengths to simulate things like what it feels like to be blind. You've worn blindfolds for many weeks at a time, and you've taped your fingers back to know what it might be like to experience having your fingers cut off, and that sort of thing. And I'm wondering where do you feel like this sense of vocation comes from in you? What is this?
I don't think I like to sort of, one doesn't wish to engage in these sort of amateur dramatics.
Hardly.
It's how else was I going to know what it's like to be blind? So I don't know. Maybe somebody else has the answer. I didn't, given my temperament, I tried to go and talk to people who were visually impaired, and I just couldn't bring myself to ask them the questions. I thought I might hurt them. So I thought, okay, I will do it myself. And beyond that, my father wanted to be a writer himself, and because he came from a working class background, by the time he was 20, 21, certain mechanisms had already been activated around him. Certain things were expected of him. His mother became a widow, so he had to go out and get a job. So I always thought that there was a kind of wound in my father, that he thought his real life didn't happen. So for me, that was always it was an abstract thing, that if I make a wrong decision, that something might go wrong. I knew what would happen. I knew precisely what would happen. To me, that I want to do this, I want to tell stories, I want to so that is the reason, I have to say.
Yep. You said earlier you don't pay that much attention to the news. Mohammed, you clearly have to because you're writing occasionally, for the New York Times, for other places. Is it difficult to open the newspaper and watch TV in the morning and see what's happening in the world and go back to your desk? And do you turn everything off when you start writing fiction in the morning? Do you shut off your email and your whatever you use, your Twitter, whatever? Is it gone, or can you manage to filter in news throughout the day as you're working on other things?
We were speaking about this earlier.
Yeah, and I'm kind of fascinated by Nadeem's kind of discipline and courage and sacrifices, he makes for his for his craft, and sometimes I tell myself, what do I sacrifice? I can't even sacrifice Facebook. So no, nothing gets turned off. It's actually watching the news, or kind of sort of watching other forms of television, or is way more fun than writing. I mean, I have to admit to that. But yes, sometimes you have deadlines, and sometimes you have expectations from yourself. So sometimes you have like an idea in your head, like for a book that goes on for sort of years. So yes, sometimes you do kind of make time, try and kind of get off Twitter for a while and see what's happening in your book. And sometimes something happens, or sometimes I realized recently only. People often ask, and Nadeem has very many things. He's very wise. He's a novelist. He writes novels, and very rarely, very occasionally, he will write a beautiful piece. But he's kind of, he's managed to kind of stay out of this media mess. So often, like friends, journalists ask, "What is it like when you're writing journalism and when you're writing fiction?" And as we're getting old, so a friend of mine sort of gave me a little gadget which kind of measures your blood pressure. I don't know what kind of friends to have. So it just occurred to me that the difference is that when I'm writing a piece of journalism, my blood pressure goes up. And when I'm writing fiction, I kind of become a little mellow, a bit sad, it goes down, kind of. So I think that's a medical difference. I don't know.
To go back to Conspiracies for a moment, you've worked at quite high positions in journalism and the media. Many people who I think of as being conspiracy-minded and paranoid, one reason they're paranoid is they feel like they never get the whole truth. They don't understand how the world works because the media lies to them. I don't mean fake news. I just mean that the real things that happen in the world aren't covered by the media. Like the powers to control their lives, the real levers of power, somehow are not the sort of things that make the nightly news, and they feel that they are shafted by forces not only beyond their control, but forces they're never going to quite understand, which is a kind of paranoia people have. How realistic is that kind of worldview to someone like yourself who has worked very hard in the BBC? How much of the world's machinations can never be quite covered by journalism? And maybe this is why fiction matters. I'm not even sure what my question is, but there it is.
I don't know. I don't know what your question is. Do you know how the world works?
I'm asking you. You're the journalist.
I don't think I know
Do you think
how the world works. And B, maybe some days I don't like the way it works. I don't care how it works. I just don't like the way it works. And I guess that's why you kind of sit down in a corner and day after day, sort of week after week, you try to create another world to kind of try and understand that how, sort of this thing works. Sometimes you can make educated guesses. For example, we started with this International New York Times having a blank page. So obviously, people saying this is censorship. This is not. How is this censorship? This is a business decision that they've made, and I know the people who publish it. So I met one of the people who run it, this media group, and they were just launching, and they said it's going to be called Century Media, and I said, why do you want to call it Century Media? They said, we already have 99 companies different. That makes sense. So now somebody who has to kind of run at least 100 companies, I'm sure there are more than 100 companies now, why should they kind of even take like a tiny risk of annoying somebody by publishing some stupid old stuff about something? When you have if I had 100 companies to run, I would do the same.
Nadeem, some writers are paranoid about their work habits. They feel that if they don't write every day from 8 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or they don't have the correct mug, or whatever, that their day is somehow slightly ruined. Do you have superstitions as a writer? Or do you have definite rituals, I will say?
Yes, I do. I like to be near my books. I own 15,000 books, about 15,000 books. And I like to know that if I needed to look something up, I can go and go. So
you have a big house.
Well, most of them are in boxes. I'm working on the big house. Yes, I sleep in the evenings and afternoons. I get up at 11 o'clock at night. I'm at my desk at midnight, and I write until 5, 6, 7, 8 in the morning.
Wow.
And then I read, and then in the afternoon I write again. But I love what you said about how the novelists and people with imagination are perhaps slightly more attracted to conspiracy theories than because this is what we do. This is basically with every sentence, every sequence, we're trying to work out, are you sure about this? But could not this have happened? Are you sure that this didn't happen? Etc. There's a story about the poet Ahmed Faraz. I read about it 15 years ago, and I'm actually writing a short story about this. And Ahmed Faraz was visiting the United States, and he was in one of those towns near the border with Canada. And his admirers in Canada, Pakistani community, heard that Faraz Sahab is just nearby. He's just on the other side. So they got on the phone and said, you have to come and visit us. And they said, well, I don't have the necessary paperwork, visa, etc. to come. So I read that someone hired a small plane, flew from Canada, smuggled Faraz Sahab into Canada, where he gave a reading, a meal, he had a drink, and towards dawn they smuggled him back into the United States. And part of me actually doesn't want to investigate that too much. Because I think it will kill the... And part of me keeps saying, no, you're thinking about Robert Musil somewhere in Europe, you're thinking about Fernando Pessoa somewhere in Latin America, and perhaps you're confusing this with Chopin's heart being cut out in Paris and being taken to Warsaw, smuggled into Warsaw. That is what happened. Shelley's heart, we believe, was taken out on that when he was cremated, and was taken out, and Mary Shelley took it with her to England, where it is buried in St. Peter's Church in Bournemouth. So I keep telling myself, please go and have a look. That is possible, but I don't think I want to. So Ahmed Faraz did smuggle himself into it, as far as I'm concerned. And
Mohammed, do you have rituals and/or superstitions about your fiction writing?
Not really. I have a young family. I have a small child. So, if he's gone to sleep, that's helped. Music sometimes a cold beer. Yeah, that's pretty much, yeah. I'm superstitious about beer.
Do you write every day of the week?
I pretend to, because I know when Nadeem spends 5 years or 6 years writing a book, I know that he's writing those 6 years of. When I'm spending 6 years on a book, I'm basically avoiding doing other things that need to be done.
Yeah.
No, I write in really little bits and pieces.
Nadeem, are you in the middle of a book now?
Yes, I have a new book which will come out in 2019 summer, and I'm working on the one after that, which is the first volume of a trilogy.
And I've heard you have in your mind a set number of books that you have almost sequentially planned out. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah?
I have, until I'm 65, I have enough books. And I'm sure as I go along, others will come.
And when you're away from home on a trip like this, do you try to keep your fiction going, or do you leave it for your desk when you return?
Well, when you're writing a novel, there is a writing itself, and then there is a lot of other kind of work, meaning you have to go and read a book for research. So that's how you can put those books aside and you think, I can read that on the plane and make notes, and then you can take that back.
Okay. Mohammed, can you read other writers' fiction while you're writing your own fiction? Some people say it gets in their head and it...
Yeah, no, I can read it. Somebody once said, oh, you shouldn't read because you might get inspired. That's like, you should go down on your bloody knees and thank God if you get inspired by someone good. You should thank your stars. So, no, I'm like, I'm completely for it. Yeah. I mean, like, if there's like, I can read, like, sort of whenever there's something good. I'll read it. I'll try to be like them. If I've just finished a book by Nadeem, and I'm kind of full of awe and admiration. There are two kinds of people. I don't know. There's this Urdu thing, what's called hasad and rashk, like when you sort of envy somebody and you want. I don't know how it translates to English, but there's like that feeling that you kind of admire somebody, but you're jealous, so you want them to become like you. But there's that other feeling that you admire somebody and you want to become like them. So I think with good writing, it's like, I want to be like Nadeem, like, so I'll kind of read everything and anything.
I'm astonished. I've read everything. I think one of the things I do when I log on.
I think people are going to think they should go and get a room. I think we should stop.
You too. I'm not needed here. Right.
Yeah.
No. Do you read other? Do you read?
Yes.
Yeah. While
absolutely.
You're working.
But the reasons are those that we should be so lucky that to read one book by Naipaul is to be able to write like him. But I do find that when I'm getting deeper and deeper into a book, there are one or two or three books that I return to again and again. Certain things get sifted to the top, and then because that is helping me to stay in the mode that I'm writing about. So, 1, 2, there might be an image which I've pinned to the wall, which is important to me, and that can be a person, it can be a photograph I've taken or cutout of a newspaper. There are certain films I will watch again and again. For the Golden Legend, I watched Kieślowski's trilogy, three colors red, three colors white and red, again and again.
Tell me about why. How would film influence your
why?
approach?
There's a sequence in blue, in three colors blue, this magnificent film with Juliette Binoche, where she's in a coffee shop and she's ordered a coffee, and she holds a sugar cube right at the at the surface of the coffee, and we see the coffee seep up very slowly into among the crystals. And I read that, and this lasts about a second and a half. And then she lets go, and it falls in. I read that they had that they actually filmed that scene again and again because they said that a viewer will put up with this image, according to Kieślowski, for 1.5 seconds, but not for 2 seconds. But the sugar was but the coffee was moving, so they actually got a specially chemically treated cube so that they could. So that is part of the editing process. In that what is it? That how long can this scene go on? And of course, Kieślowski is a great filmmaker, and there's this sort of searing image when this woman's husband has been killed, and she's leaving her house, and she drags her knuckles across the wall, stone wall, and does that. So that was an image which I needed, I realized. But that kind of editing things is all, because my book is also about a widow.
You've both written very powerfully about women in your novels. And the film series, of course, is about three women. Your novel, Alice But, I'm forgetting the entire title, but Our Lady of
Alice But.
Yes, some beautiful, devastating writing from the point of view of a woman in that novel. Does watching films like that, how does one prepare to write from the perspective of a female character or about a heroine in your fiction?
Well,
I guess, listen to them, casually. Shut up and listen. So I've been lucky enough that when I started my work life in journalism, because before that I was in the Air Force, when you hardly ever saw a woman, like for months. You never saw a woman. And then I was lucky that when I got into journalism, I was working for a new magazine called Newsline, which was started by my late dear friend and one of the most courageous, incredible editors in Pakistan, Razia Bhatti. And all the staff were women. And I was like one of the two token male reporters who was just there to kind of run errands and sometimes go out and find these things. So I got to hang out with them a lot, and it was crazy work hours. So you get to see them like in their various kind of stages, work, family, love, sort of the whole, or at least a lot more complexity than you're likely to see if you're not working with these bunch of incredibly strong women, sort of from various backgrounds who have like their completely unique path. So I've been kind of inspired by them, and then you kind of you take your chances, and after that you hope that you can.
Do we have time to keep going for a bit, or is it questions?
We could have a couple of questions.
A few questions? Okay. Do we have a microphone? Does someone have a question?
You raise your hand.
We can't hear you.
Hello? Oh,
yes.
Now it's on. Okay. My question's for Mohammed Hanif, and on the case of Exploding Mangoes, I wanted to ask about the role of satire and what role you feel satire plays in writing a book that can be read as political critique. Or, because you discussed earlier censorship in Pakistan, and so I'm wondering if there's a kind of freedom that you get in writing in satire to kind of say things that you wouldn't otherwise say or be able to say.
I think there's a sort of coping mechanism, especially under dictatorships, and sort of when things are bad, when you're not allowed to sort of give out basic information like who killed whom and kind of why. If you pick up Pakistani newspapers, some days you'll have like things like unknown people kind of killed these unknown people who were kind of found at this unknown place, and reasons are obviously always unknown. So people then, what they do is that, especially I've lived through two dictatorships, and what people do is that they would they would make jokes about them. They would like construct elaborate jokes about them, and somehow they had life of their own. Like even before internet and mobile phones, you'll hear like a joke in Karachi, and next day you're in Peshawar, and somebody's telling you the same joke. So I was always amazed that whether the two different people kind of came up with the same thing, or is it this grand conspiracy behind these jokesters? So I think that's how people learn to deal with it. And now, obviously, We have WhatsApp, so sort of everything gets explained and illustrated quite quickly.
Another question?
This is a question for Nadeem Aslam. Nadeem, I just have a small question. Do you make enough money to live by writing?
Not during those 10 years. I worked on a construction site for 4 years. Beyond that, I mean, as a single man, I don't have any children, etc. So yes, that was a decision I made, and partly because of that. Because a child is not a toy.
One more.
One more? In front?
Sorry, so Hanif, who told you the story? What was your reply to the general?
Like, well, if I told you, then I'll have to kind of, kill you or something, or arrange another conspiracy to get you bumped off. Let's not go there.
Well, I'd like to thank all three of you. Let's give them a big hand.